Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries and welcome to my dad's closet. This is actually the part where I had planned to be like, yikes, but it looks like he's already cleaned it before I could get here. I think he was embarrassed. Luckily, I have a before photo. So my dad's been wanting some custom closet cabinets for a while in hopes that he can keep this space better organized and much less like that photo. So in this video, we're gonna build him out a custom closet. Okay, so first, let's talk a little bit about layout. People are always asking how I plan out my projects, so I thought I would go into a little bit of that here. But I think to the disappointment of most of those who ask, I don't use a software to design my projects. I use good old-fashioned pencil and paper. I started by drawing a rough sketch of Dad's closet shape. So it's a rectangle, but one of the corners is like a diagonal, and that's where the door is. So my plan was to build some cabinets that span the full length of this wall and then add another cabinet in here, kind of in the corner. So I was mostly only concerned with the dimension of this wall and this wall, so I measured them and I got 64-ish. It didn't really matter that this was specific since there's like blank space. But this was 76 and about 3/8. So the cabinet that goes in this corner, I asked Dad what he wanted, and this was roughly what he told me. So he wanted a tall cabinet here with some drawers in the middle, some shelves here at the bottom for shoes, and then some cubbies here at the top for clothes. Now, this ended up not looking anything like this when I got done building it, but this is originally what we started with. So that will take care of this wall. For this wall, I'm spanning the entire width with cabinets, and this is roughly what we decided on. So Dad wanted 2 tall cabinets with hanging rods at the top and in the middle, and then a small, like narrow cubby cabinet kind of thing with some drawers at the bottom and some shelves at the top. So just like this cabinet, this narrow cabinet ended up changing a bit as well, but this is what we had originally planned, both for this cabinet and for this set of cabinets. Now, to figure out how much plywood that I needed, I drew out some rectangles to represent my plywood sheets. I know this is rough. And I figured that if I made my cabinet boxes 16 inches or 15 7/8 if you're counting the curve, that I could get 3 strips of plywood per sheet. Each tall cabinet needs 1 strip of plywood for each side, so 2 total. And then I can use the rest of these strips for shelving. So you can see on my drawing here that I just divided these sheets into 3 strips, and then I numbered how many side panels I needed for the tall sides, and then I numbered my shelves as well. And I figured that I needed about 5 sheets of plywood, but because I didn't draw each piece specifically, I did buy 6 sheets just in case I forgot something and I didn't want to run back to town. But I did only end up using 5 sheets. So I also decided to add face frames on the front of these cabinets, and I used 1x2s for all of my face frames and for my drawer fronts, except for the bottom strip on all my face frames. I used a 1x3. Now, I've mentioned this before, but I like to cut my 1x2s and 1x3s from wider boards because they're typically better quality, at least where I live. So I used 1x10, and I could get 6 1x2s from a 1x10, or I could get 4 1x2s and a 1x3. I only needed 1 1x3 just for the bottom pieces of all the face frames, and then 1x2s for everything else. So all of that said, I ended up needing 3 1x10s. This was my shopping list. 6 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood and 3 1x10s. I know when people ask me how I plan out my projects, that's probably not what you wanted, but that's literally what I did. Okay, that was kind of a lot, but armed with this rough sketch of where I was headed, I was ready to get building. So first I ripped a few of my plywood sheets into 3 strips. The ceilings in the closet are 8 foot tall, so I cut my cabinet sides to 7 foot long so that Dad can still store stuff on top, but also so that we have room once we get these cabinets inside to tilt them upright. The hanging rod cabinets needed 3 shelves, 1 at the top, 1 in the middle, and 1 at the bottom. I could have saved a little bit of wood and left the bottom of these cabinets open to the floor, but one of Dad's struggles is using the floor as a shelf. Any open floor space inside of a cabinet will eventually just spill out into the middle. So I'm optimistically hoping that having a bottom shelf in these cabinets will help him keep things contained versus spilling out all over the floor.
Speaking of, remind me to tell you a funny story about that later. So I opted to use water-based stain on these cabinets, and I've mentioned this a million times before, but water-based stain is kind of difficult to apply on already assembled projects. So I stained each piece individually before assembling. To keep things simple, I assembled these cabinets using pocket holes and screws. And in addition to the 3 shelves, I also added 2 strips along the back edge to allow me to secure these cabinets to the wall when they're installed. After I had 2 identical cabinets, I moved on to adding the face frames. And while I build those, let me jump back to that funny story. So my parents built their current home and we moved in when I was in the 3rd grade. When we were younger, Dad would pay me and my sister once a year to clean out his closet. Now, I'm not exaggerating when I say that we could literally open the door and the pile of clothes on the floor was at least waist high. One year, someone had gifted Dad a country ham for Christmas and he put it in his closet, don't ask me why, and he forgot about it. So months later, my sister and I found it green and covered in mold when we were cleaning, and it's been a running family joke ever since. Nobody can think about Dad's closet without also thinking about country ham. Anyway, to finish these up, I cut some wooden dowels for hanging. I used an existing hanger to help me determine where was the best place to install the rod, marked this on each side, and then pre-drilled pilot holes at these marks. I also drilled pilot holes into the center of my dowels, so that way I could drive screws through the holes in the cabinet so that the tip just barely stuck out. Then I could place these tips into the pilot holes on my rods. Now I was ready to build the large cabinet with the drawers. So my original plan was to make this cabinet with shelves on the bottom for shoes, drawers in the middle, and shelves at the top for clothes. But after some more thought, I decided to just do drawers on the bottom and then shelves on the top, and I'll deal with the shoes later.
Okay, so this cabinet, like the opening, is 36 inches. So I kind of hated to cut more strips than I needed, because if I cut a strip off a sheet of plywood, I can only get 2 pieces out of a strip, and then the other piece is too short and it's not useful for anything. It's a lot of waste. So I was trying to only use a few of these strips, but I do think I need another one here in the back. And then I remembered that I'm making like 2 full width drawers here, and then I'm making 4 like half width drawers at the top. So I need to cut some more strips to install, to put a divider in to mount the drawer slides, and this will all make sense once we get building it. But basically I need to add 3 more strips. So I've got the pocket holes drilled in these strips. But I got to thinking, so I'm gonna have a face frame here. So the front of this is gonna be covered, and these drawers are going to be, they're gonna be inset. I don't really wanna put a face frame across here, because then I have like these 2 drawers that aren't individually divided, and then these drawers that aren't individually divided. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm going to just leave these like this, and then I'll have the drawer fronts overlay them. That way they'll be like covered, but when you open the drawers, you will still be able to see these edges. So I'm gonna edge band this edge and this edge, and then I'm gonna have to stain them.
Once I had all my drawer dividers in, just like the previous cabinets, I added a face frame. Then, because I added the face frame, I needed to add some spacer blocks for my drawer slides so that they'll be flush to the inside opening. I'll link a whole separate video for installing drawer slides in the video description below if you're interested. So 16-inch drawer slides are actually more like 15 3/4 inches long. So I was still able to use 16-inch slides even though my sides were only 15 7/8 inches deep. But that also meant that I needed to make my drawer boxes 15 3/4 inches deep instead of the full 16 inches like usual. So after my slides were installed, I started working on cutting down the pieces for my drawer boxes. Someone recently asked me how I clean the dust off my camera, and it's really very simple. Though I do every now and then pop the lens off and clean the inside too. Anyway, I cut some wider strips for my deeper drawers and some narrower strips for my shallow drawers. I'm not going to go into super detail on how I build my drawer boxes since I covered that in a separate video that I'll link below. But I cut dadoes to install the drawer bottoms, cut the strips to length, and then edge banded the top of each piece. Now here's where I did things a bit differently than usual. Normally, I assemble my drawer boxes with pocket holes and the drawer front covers them. But in this case, I wasn't installing a solid drawer front, so I used pocket holes on the back and then just screwed through the sides for the front pieces. And this will make more sense in just a second. Then I installed these into my cabinet.
So I normally leave bigger gaps between my drawer boxes for like clearance and it just usually works out better to have at least an inch between your drawer boxes. In this case, I did not build them that way because I'm adding some like 1x2s on the front of these for a drawer front. And I didn't want there to be like only a tiny little bit of surface area to glue in or nail those fronts onto. So I made the drawer boxes taller, that way when I glue and nail the frame on the front, it'll be plenty of surface area for that to stick to. If I was making slab style or like solid drawer fronts here, I would definitely make these gaps a little bit bigger, but I really wanted a shaker style and I'm just trying to save on material, so I'm using 1x2s. And anyway, all of that said, I intentionally made these gaps small, but I think that probably they could have been a little bit bigger than I made them. But it's already done, so I'm not gonna go back and trim them now.
For the drawer fronts, I use what I like to call the cheater's method. So instead of making a whole solid panel, I just made some frames from 1x2s to give me the shaker style look. I assembled each frame with pocket holes and screws and then installed them onto my drawer boxes. These frames weren't large enough to cover any pocket holes if I had used them on the front of my drawer boxes, so that's why I assembled these with screws from the sides. To help Dad, hopefully, stay a bit more organized, I added some shelves into the top section of this cabinet with dividers. That way his stacks of clothes won't just spill onto each other on one long shelf. So I cut 2 shelves and a few divider panels to fill this open space above the drawers. I installed the shelves with pocket holes and then just tacked the dividers in with some brad nails. Now, to be honest, I do think that dividing it into 3 sections made these cubbies a bit too narrow, so I only used one divider in the middle section. Then I left the top one open so that Dad can put boxes or larger items on it if he needs to. It's always good to have a little variety with your storage options. And at this point, I only had one piece left to build, the tall, narrow cabinet to go alongside the hanging rod pieces. So I mentioned that we had previously planned to make shelves for Dad's shoes in the cabinet that I just finished building. They were supposed to go underneath the drawers. I had planned to add some smaller drawers in the bottom of this tall, skinny cabinet, but after thinking about it, it didn't seem practical to do either of those things. So instead, I added more drawers in the other cabinet, and then I made this tall cabinet for just his shoes. Essentially, I just assembled a tall, narrow cabinet box, then drilled shelf pin holes up the entire thing. That way, Dad can have as many shelves as he wants, and he can space them out to fit whatever kind of shoes that he needs. Sneakers, boots, dress shoes, whatever. I also decided to place this cabinet between the 2 hanging rod cabinets, and just to give it a little contrast, I opted not to stain this one and just leave it natural. Was this also partially because I was tired of having to stain everything? 100% yes. But I did stain the face frame, so at least that did match. And once it was attached, I could finally seal everything with a few coats of Minwax polyacrylic. Then I had to add the drawer pulls.
Okay, so struggling a bit with the knobs and pulls here. So this opening is not huge. My concern is if I put a knob in here, is Dad and his fat fingers gonna be able to like get in here very easily to open this up? Is he gonna scrape his hand on the corners here all the time? Like, is it gonna be annoying? And I'm afraid that it might be. So I think I'm going to put the knobs on these drawers here, just because that way he doesn't have any obstacles to get around to grab the knob to open this like he would if I put them in here. But down here on the big drawers, I've got these long pulls and there's plenty of room to get your hand in here for that. So I think this is what I'm gonna do. I think this will work out best, practically speaking, for Dad.
And with that, these cabinets were ready to install. So projects like this are kind of frustrating sometimes because they're going into a small space that's really hard to film. So I wanted to share just a few finished shots of these pieces in their entirety before we cram them into a closet. Now, when I first went to measure for Dad's closet, the floor was covered in stuff. Remember that before shot? So I took the measurements, but I never thought to check for obstacles like the floor register. I removed the wire shelving, patched the holes, and then I let Mom and Dad give the walls a fresh coat of paint while I pondered how to handle the register. The bottom of my cabinets were too close to the floor for a toe kick register, but even if it wasn't, it fell where 2 cabinets were going to butt together, so it wouldn't have worked anyway. So I ended up building a simple plywood frame to set my cabinets on. I cut away the baseboard to fit this along the wall. Then I cut out a hole about where the vent was, added a redirect, and a vent cover so that the air can blow out of this opening. This isn't really ideal, but it will work fine. Then we could set the cabinets right on top. So Dad and I carried these cabinets in, but I'm gonna be honest, the space was too small to film. Anywhere I put the camera was gonna be in the way, and I knew we'd just end up knocking it over and breaking it. So you'll have to use your imagination for this part. But we set the 2 hanging rod cabinets and the shoe cabinet onto the plywood frame along the back wall. Then I cut away the baseboard and fit the drawer cabinet into the left corner. Once all the cabinets were in place, I could screw them together and then secure them to the wall studs and let Dad take it from there. I know it's hard to see it all through the camera in this small space, but the improvement is very clear. I'm hoping that this helps him stay a little more organized, and I even hung a little reminder of the old days up so that he never forgets the country ham incident. I'm going to bet that Mom's closet remodel is going to be in the near future now that Dad's is out of the way, but for now, I think they're both pretty happy with how this turned out. And I'm glad that it's finally checked off my to-do list. As always, I've got plenty more projects to share soon, so be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and until next time, friends, happy building!